This is Sawyer Robertson, and you're listening to the Bearcast on SicEm365.com.
Welcome into the Bearcast on SicEm365.com, presented by WellMed Medical Management and Barefoot Campus Outfitter. Head on over to Barefoot Campus Outfitter in Waco, or go to the website and use SicEm365 as your code to save 20% off your next purchase. Today, Colt, Barber, and I are going to preview Baylor versus TCU, the rivalry, not the Bluebonnet battle, the Bluebonnet showdown, none of that. This is the rivalry, and it's going to be a really interesting one and a very impactful one for both programs as they try to figure out their way to potentially compete for a Big 12 championship. It seems a little bit far away for both of them at this point in the season, but when you look at the records, Baylor is still very much in it with just one conference loss at the moment. It's a big one on Saturday, and one that I know, Colt, we've been waiting to preview for a while. Yeah. This is kind of a turning point game following the bye week.
Yeah, I mean, it is a turning point. Last year was such a big deal coming out and playing Tech on the road, winning that game and kind of propelled Baylor to the end of the season. But it's also a game that you start losing. With all the turnover in the conferences, you start losing the regionality of the sport. And I know Baylor plays Houston, but they don't play Tech this year. Obviously, you're not playing Texas anymore, and you go through the list of not playing teams. Baylor and TCU is a protected rivalry in the Big 12. I think there needs to be more of those. I think you need to go to a pod type of system where you're playing teams from Texas. It's just good for fan bases. But this right now is the one for Baylor. It's like the one to get excited about. It's the big game for both of these teams. I know TCU played SMU, and there's some other Texas. We talked about Houston being on schedule, but TCU also doesn't play Texas Tech this year, which Tech, I don't want to say that Tech caught a break. To a great extent, Baylor and TCU caught a break this year, but those are rivalry games that you're not getting to play, and anything can happen in those games. And but this is a game that emotionally is just different for the fans. I know there's been speculation on how Baylor has treated TCU versus how TCU has treated Baylor. But at the end of the day, there's been a lot of close games outside of the years where Baylor just hasn't been good. You look at 2017, and then 2023. Outside of that, there's been a lot of pretty competitive, close back and forth games, double overtime, triple overtime, last second field goals in the last couple of seasons, 2022 and then obviously 2024. It's just a lot of fun. It's a fun game. It's good for the fans, and it makes you excited to preview a game like this, especially when both teams have quite a bit to still play for.
Okay, Colt. So we're going to go through and talk about this TCU game, but I do want to look into the past. So obviously Baylor in the last 10 games, they've only won twice. They're 2-8 in the last 10 against TCU. 3 of those losses have come by more than 20 points. 6 of those have been one-score games. I think that's kind of what you've been looking at. That makes a lot of sense here. The other area that I looked at, because I've been intrigued by this, because even in the seasons where Baylor's been really good, they haven't blown out TCU. And TCU's been bad a few of these years, like going back a long ways. I mean, you go back to that 2013 season where Baylor literally survived in Fort Worth, and Baylor was by far better than TCU that year. 2021, another one that looks at, and Baylor wasn't able to get by them that year with possibly the best team in the program's history. But the thing I kind of just wanted to go back and look at was, when's the last time that Baylor won a game by more than 6 points in this series? You have to go all the way back to 1994. That's incredible. The only game they have won by 6 points specifically was 2019, and that was a double overtime game that was not a 6-point game. You have to go all the way back to 94 before, that's the only time Baylor's put together a complete dominant performance against TCU. That was a long time ago. And again, as I mentioned, that this is a game that TCU has gotten up for every year. Like, it doesn't matter what their team looks like. They can be, 5-6. They can be 4-8. It doesn't matter. They got up for this game. Baylor has not been like that. Baylor's had a couple years where they floundered, a couple years where they had the much better team and did not show up the way that they should have. That's got to flip in this series, because right now, over the last 10 years, it hasn't been a rivalry. It's been very much a TCU matchup that they've got the advantage in. It's been very favorable for them. Baylor has to flip that script and find a way to become the more hungry, more physical, and more confident team going into these matchups.
Yeah. And what I'll say too, like, I think that you look at those last 10 years and Baylor's lows have been so much further down than TCU's. I know TCU's had some bad years, but I'm talking about 2017, 2023 specifically of just bad football teams. And TCU took advantage of those. And then in Baylor's years of being up, you look at 21. And then even in 2019, I don't remember what TCU, I'm going to look real quick.
They weren't
finished
good.
in 2019.
No.
Yeah, I went 5-7. Baylor beat them in double overtime. At that point in the season, they were 4-4. So yeah, I mean, but I'm when we're talking about 5-7 TCU teams, not 1-11 or 3-9 Baylor teams that struggled. But when you look at the games where you say, okay, you go into and even in 2022, the competitiveness of this game, it's a standard rivalry game. TCU is number 4 in the country, number 5 in the country in that time. They needed a last-second field goal to beat Baylor in Waco. And I just think that speaks to when both teams are good teams or average teams, is going to be competitive. It's a true rivalry game where basically anything can happen when both of these teams are decent teams. And I'm not talking about 23 and 20. Anybody and everybody did beat Baylor in those years. Baylor was not good in those seasons. When these teams are competitive with each other, they have the competitive standpoint of we can go in and compete in every game. These games are going to be competitive. And that's why, it's a 2.5 point line. There's some speculation that this line was going to be 8 to 10 points.
It hasn't jumped.
It's back down to 2.5.
It's back down. Okay. Cause it did jump up to 3.5.
Yeah, it started at 3.5, moved back down to 2.5, or moved to 2.5, back up to 3.5. And now it's back down to 2.5 again as of Monday or Wednesday night. So it's just a game that you can't anticipate what's going to happen because anything can really happen. And I think that for Baylor's standpoint, the 2022 season speaks to that of, hey, I don't know what that line was for that game, but TCU was the outright favorite. Everyone expected the Baylor to get blown out in that game, and it was competitive down to the last kick of the game. So this game's not going to be any different. And if Baylor comes out and blows TCU out, I'd be utterly shocked. And this is not a game where I would expect TCU to come out and blow Baylor out because it's not the 2023 team. It's not the 2017 team.
Yeah, a lot of it, I think, is just going to come down to turnovers. If one team has a bunch of turnovers, then maybe that can flip.
It can snowball,
things.
absolutely.
But the history of this definitely speaks to these games are either close or it's a TCU blowout. That's kind of what what it has been over the past few years. Okay, so I think, Colt, the first area that I want to start this week as we preview this matchup has to start the quarterback position. Sawyer Robertson and Josh Hoover are going to be dueling in this matchup against two really pretty poor secondaries and pretty poor defenses in general. Currently, Robertson leads the nation in passing yards and passing touchdowns. Hoover is second in both of those areas. These two guys have been thrown it all over the place. You look a little deeper into the stats, and neither one has been, utterly dominant all year. They both have had some flaws and some faults, but in general, they've been getting it done on the stat sheet, and now they get an opportunity to really take advantage of a rival defense that has been struggling on both sides.
Yeah, and they've played very similar competition. They had 3 common opponents at this point. Same, I guess TCU has lost. They're 1-2 in those games. Baylor's 2-1 in those games because of the difference in the Kansas State game. But defensive wise, F+ defenses, TCU to this point has faced on average the number 47 FEI defense. Baylor has faced the number 47.33 FEI defense. So, and that excludes outliers, Oklahoma State for Baylor and then UNC for TCU. So very similar competition as we already knew, and very similar stats, very similar teams on both sides of the ball. But you have the quarterback position that you just mentioned, and it's really interesting considering that the history of the offenses that both of these guys run. Kendall Briles, obviously the Art Briles offense, but then Jake Spavital models his offense off of that scheme so much. They have their differences, but what I will say, and this is something that we've discussed all season long about TCU, is that even though that they say they want to run the ball, they get away from it so quick. Jake Spavital, on the other hand, Baylor hasn't run the football nearly as much because of the injury to Bryson Washington and obviously Dawson Pendergrass. But to me, that's more of an injury deal. And I'm not saying that TCU won't as Barnes gets more healthy, or maybe they match up in particular games differently. Maybe it's this game. but they just have not shown that commitment to run the football. And that goes back to last year when they were using Savion Williams at the end of the season to try to generate a running game. So to me, that's the biggest differences in the offenses. At quarterback, I mean, you can make a case for either of these guys. I think obviously Baylor fans are going to go with Sawyer. I think Sawyer has a little bit more of that. He's not as much of a system quarterback as Josh is. I think Josh is a really good quarterback, but he fits that system really well. And maybe he just had to have the aid of a threat at the running game. But I like both of these quarterbacks a lot. And that's, I mean, you mentioned it, turnovers. If a guy throws 2 interceptions in this game, that could be the difference in this game when you're talking about a game with a 2.5 point spread.
And you're talking about the 2 guys that have had problems in that area. Per PFF, Josh Hoover is the worst quarterback in the Big 12 when it comes to turnover-worthy plays. He is the most in the conference, but Sawyer Robertson is not far behind. He's 3rd in the Big 12, 3rd worst in the Big 12 in that area. So both these guys have made some questionable throws. And honestly, Colt, I think you're on to something a little bit. The fact that they've been kind of relied on to lead their offense and carry their offense because neither team has had a run game. I mean, we can say that Baylor should have a run game or that Baylor's got, Bryson Washington, but like they have not ran the ball well. It just is what it is. And they've had some tough matchups. I understand that, but it hasn't been something that has been consistent. And that has to change really for Baylor to have success going forward. I don't really expect that to change for TCU because they didn't do it last year. And to a great extent, they didn't necessarily do it the year before either. They've kind of been like this. And Sonny Dykes has been like this for quite a few years. Yeah, they throw the football. And I mean, they got lucky their year, not lucky, but the year they made it to the national championship game, they had a really good running quarterback. And so they were able to really lean
and good running backs.
Yeah, good running backs, but like they had to build around that. And remember that year they started with Chandler Morris because they wanted to play more like this as opposed to what they ended up getting with Duggan. So very interesting there. I think that's going to be a huge talking point going into this game and after this game, because I do think whichever quarterback plays better is probably going to be the one that his team ends up winning this game by the end of it.
And you mentioned the turnover-worthy plays with Sawyer having 8 for 25 and the number for Josh escapes me. But the difference to me in that is Sawyer's turnover-worthy plays are a 2.7 rate, and then Josh's turnover rate was like 5, almost 6. And so
5, I think.
Yeah, so that just shows the usage, and then how often are they potentially turning the football over. And Josh has, I mean, throughout this season, he has games that are up there in turnover-worthy plays. I mean, it's not just 3 a game. He has some with 0, but then it's some with significant numbers. And I want to pull those numbers up so we can go over them. But I think that comes down to teams not really respecting their run game at this point. And even against Kansas State, when TCU wanted to run the ball, and that was made a big deal when they ran the ball for like almost 7 yards a carry with Barnes, but Kansas State had no respect for it. And I almost think that Baylor's going to take that same approach and of just like, hey, we're going to kind of dedicate some, scheme to your run game, but we're going to make Josh Hoover earn it. We're going to make him earn it through the air. We're not going to make it easy on him. And with those receivers, that's what you're going to have to do. I want to pull those up for Josh Hoover, his numbers for the season. Because it was a kind of a staggering number whenever I saw it for the turnover-worthy plays. So he had SMU 2, Arizona State 4, Colorado 2, Kansas State 3. And so basically in all their games that they were challenged, he was potentially turning the ball over. The turnover-worthy plays for the Arizona State game specifically was 9.1. Kansas State was 5.7. And those resulted in turnovers too. Had in those games, he had 5 interceptions. So seems very similar to what we talked about last year going into the Baylor game. He's potentially going to make mistakes. You have to capitalize. And then Baylor didn't capitalize, but they still won the game. So I'm anxious to see how this game goes and if Baylor's able to break through with some turnovers and get some in this particular game.
So diving a little bit deeper into these defenses, TCU has allowed at least 3 touchdowns to the opposing quarterback in 4 straight games. That bodes well for Sawyer Robertson to get his streak back on track after it got broken against Kansas State, his 3 touchdown streak. Yeah. They're the second worst pass efficiency defense in the Big 12, allow the second most passing yards per game at 241 per game, and the third highest completion percentage at 65.6%. They do create turnovers, have quite a few interceptions this year. That's kind of what they're baking into it, is that they're going to get turnovers, and that's going to allow them to get out of tough situations and tough jams. But man, I mean, like I know third down defense and fourth down defense don't matter as much as they used to, but TCU is terrible at both.
They
I
are.
mean, they can't get off the field at all. That bodes well, once again, for Sawyer Robertson to have a big game. On the flip side, Baylor's given up 290 passing yards in 3 games this year, and that's despite playing what I would say is a pretty mediocre throwing quarterback schedule that they've faced so far this year. I think that's pretty fair to say. They're 11th in passing yards allowed, 11th in pass efficiency defense, and they've allowed the 5th highest completion percentage at 62.8%. Again, both these quarterbacks are set up very, very well. Like, if they're not turning the ball over, each one should probably throw for 300 plus yards and 3 touchdowns, just kind of off just before even starting the game. That's kind of what the baseline should look like based on how these defenses have played. Obviously, maybe teams get better. In Baylor's case, coming off the bye week, maybe they shore some things up, but it's kind of hard to predict that based on what we've seen so far.
Yeah, and that's been what we've talked about with Baylor, and it's the style of defense they're playing currently, which I think at this point we can say very soundly that it's a bend but don't break style of defense, because they're keeping everything in front of them. Besides the flurry against SMU where they had 3 plays over 40 yards for scores, that was the difference in that game. Baylor winning it kind of relatively easily, or not going into double overtime at least, and the game going as it did. But Baylor's trying to keep everything in front of them, and I think that's where this matchup becomes intriguing, is because if that's the defense they're playing on the back end, does TCU just try to run the football? And if I'm Dave Aranda, I'm forcing that issue against TCU, saying, hey, we're going to give you the run if you're willing to commit to it. And then we'll make adjustments off of that. But nothing at this point tells you that they're going to do that. Now, Kavorian Barnes is healthy. He's talented. He's capable. I don't know enough about TCU's offensive line. Well, I do know enough about it. I don't think they're good enough, even against Baylor's run front, that they're going to go out and run for 200 yards if you just give it to them. They're beat up. The injury report showed not just their left tackle that's out for the season, but their left guard and their starting center are also questionable for this game. So it doesn't sound like they'll be 100%. I would expect them to play because their depth is not that strong. But I'm really curious if Baylor goes out and says, hey, we're going to keep everything in front of us. We're going to make Josh Hoover throw into tight windows. We're not going to try to confuse him as much, or just go through his progressions and make throws. And we're not going to let Eric McAllister beat us, because when you look at when they're scoring quick, they're scoring down the field, is Eric McAllister. I mean, that's truly what they have. And I honestly trust Dave Aranda to not take him away like he did Jordan Tyson, that had like 43 yards in that game against Baylor, because there's too many other weapons to do it exactly like that. But Dave Aranda is pretty good in those situations, regardless of what you feel about Baylor's overall defense performances.
Yeah, I think a big thing that you brought up there when talking about TCU's offensive line is that, once again, they're in the midst of a 5-game stretch here. They've had to play 5 games in a row. They're going to have to play 1 more next week before their bye week. This feels like a game where Baylor's defensive line has to just play well. I mean, just frankly, they have to be the more physical, more energized, more confident, more refreshed. I mean, they just had a bye week. If you're going to play good football, it has to come in a game like this. And Baylor's going to be relying on them, I think, because you mentioned, I do believe the recipe for success here is Baylor's front 4 winning against TCU's front 5. I think that's the way that you win this game, because you need to put Hoover in situations where he's seeing a lot of guys in coverage. I know a lot of people are talking about, speed up Josh Hoover, bring all these blitzes. That's great in theory, but if you don't get home, these receivers will tear you apart. I mean, Eric McAllister is just one of them. I mean, Jordan Dwyer is really good as well. He's getting close to 400 yards receiving so far in this year. Joseph Manjak's a really talented slot guy who just gets open, right? He's just open. And if you give him quick releases, I mean, it's going to be a 5-10 yard gain pretty quickly and pretty easily. They got good tight ends as well. I just don't know that the recipe for success is continuing to blitz him play after play. If you want to blitz him some, that's fine. But I think in general, you need to be able to win with your front 4 guys. And Baylor hasn't done that all year. So you're kind of hoping on just a flip of the script here. You're hoping on TCU's offensive line maybe not being at 100%. And you're also hoping that the fact that they don't necessarily have to worry too much about the run game that maybe helps them a little bit in their pass rush identity as well. But I think in general, you need to be able to stop the run and be able to get after the quarterback with your front four guys. Your linebackers need to clean up the other stuff. And then your secondary just needs to be connected with how many guys they're being able to drop back into coverage.
Yeah. So you mentioned that if you blitz or don't blitz Josh Hoover. So according to PFF, when he's blitzed, which this season's 28.3% of the time, he's completing 64.5% of his passes, 522 yards, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and that's his best offensive passing grade is when he is blitzed at 90.1. So when he's kept clean, 82.3. When he's blitzed, is 90.1. And I go back, and I don't know this off the top of my head, but they had a couple of long plays to Eric McAllister against SMU, and they've had him throughout this year. And I feel like every time it's either a single high safety or no safety in the middle of the field, they throw a slant to Eric McAllister, and he breaks it for 70 yards. Like, you can't afford to have those plays. And SMU gave them up. I remember that was 2 of them late. One was for 70, one was for 40-ish yards. I'm assuming that SMU brought pressure on those, and it left it open in the middle of the field for him to score. But, yeah, they blitz PFF numbers-wise, but it's not this – it's different because of the way Dave Aranda utilizes his defensive fronts. I think you do simulated pressures. You have guys drop back, but you're not going to be overly blitzing. You're not going to bring 5 or 6 guys in this game. You're not going to hold up in your secondary with that because of the talent that they have. Specifically, Eric McAllister. Like, he's the one that just scares me. Like, Dwyer's good, but McAllister's the one that's like, if you let him get into open space with the ball, he's probably going to score or get 40 yards because he's so fast. And then he's just so big, and so you're probably going to have to double him, and that means you're putting a lot of pressure on 3 other guys to hold up on the other side of the field. So I like Baylor's I like potentially the approach of just playing guys in coverage, trying to get home with 4. Baylor's done a decent job pressuring. They just haven't finished plays, and they have to finish on Josh Hoover in this particular game.
Yes, they do. All right, I want to talk a little bit more about these receivers because I do think it's an area that Baylor's going to have to really focus in on. Tevin Williams is likely going to be out this week. He's listed as doubtful. I don't think he's going to play. And then you look at kind of the other guys, it's LeVar Thornton, who I think has actually played pretty well this year. I think he's had a good year, a couple bad moments here and there, but I do think he's a good one. I think he could give McAllister some issues. And then, it's probably going to be Caldra Wilford, maybe a little bit of Caden Jenkins, maybe little Reggie Bush. That's kind of what they're going to be looking at here. And so McAllister has 541 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns against Kansas State this past weekend. He had a one-on-one shot that was like a 75-yard touchdown down the sideline. He also had a jump ball touchdown late in that game. I would probably call that one garbage time, but it is what it is.
Both of them kind of were. Yeah, no, he can make plays, and he makes those plays.
Yeah, and then you got Jordan Dwyer, who's got 357 yards, 2 touchdowns. Joseph Manjack, 309 yards, 2 touchdowns. Those are kind of their main guys. Ed Small, you'll see him out there as well. He's got a couple touchdowns at 186 yards. And then 2 tight ends that are pretty good in DeAndre Rogers and Chase Curtis, who are both over 100 yards receiving on the year. So they have a nice kind of, I would say, a unique setup. They throw the ball to a lot of guys. McAllister is their guy. Dwyer is their number 2 guy. And then they got a bunch of guys that they're just going to kind of cycle in and throw the ball to a lot. It makes them pretty dangerous, though, and that's kind of what they've been trying to do is allow Hoover to be in the pocket for as long as possible, and then you trust these receivers to get open and make plays. That's going to be what they're going to try to do to attack Baylor's secondary, which has not been attacked to this level all season. They have not faced a quarterback-receiver combo or an offense like this all year. On the flip side, Baylor has also not really faced a quarterback that's as much of a statue as Josh Hoover is. He can move a little bit, don't get me wrong, but he's much more of a statue than some of these other guys that they've had to face all year.
Yeah, I mean, he's been sacked 11 times this season, and some of the other guys that Baylor's faced have been sacked more, but he's a different type of player. I think where you look at Baylor's strength as a pass rushing team, it's Matthew Fobbs-White. He's not going to bull rush guys to get back right into someone's lap. He's usually going to flush and then chase, and he's going to catch somebody. He hasn't had that opportunity to this year. I mean, maybe with the exception of Oklahoma State with Flores, and Baylor did have 2 sacks in that game. So the way Baylor's designed to sack quarterbacks is is not Keldrick Falk. Like you're not going to get that type of impact. You're not crashing the pocket from the inside. He needs to flush down into Jackie Marshall, Cooper Lands, DK Kalu, or chase a guy out of the pocket. So this game sets up well from that standpoint, because that's what Josh wants to do. We talked about this earlier this week. Josh wants to step into the pocket and make a throw. He's more like Kevin Jennings, just not as athletic as Kevin Jennings. He's going to step down. He can go get yards. Like, he can do that. But I think Baylor has to play discipline in front of him, make him stay in the pocket, and try to throw into coverage if you're not getting home. And I don't want to say you don't want to flush him out of the pocket, but you don't want to go get 5 yards on 3rd and 5. So you just have to be careful, because he's capable of doing that. But yeah, their receivers are the key. And that's why I go back. Does Baylor try to play a dime package in this game? Do they try to go true peso? Do they do a mixture of peso and dime where they have 2 stars on the field? I would love to see Kendrick Simpkins and DJ Coleman on the field together in this game, just to kind of give you an extra body out there. What does Dave Aranda do? Does he come up with something unique from that standpoint? He's not going to add a ton, but off of a bye week, you might see something new that we haven't seen this week. So it'll be a fascinating matchup, because I think Baylor's going to force TCU to run the football to truly be as efficient as they can be in this game.
So as far as stopping TCU, I do think turnovers are going to be a big part of this. And so I wanted to go back and quickly look at where Baylor is at currently in turnover margin this season. Right now, they're at -4 in turnover margin. Gets even worse in the Power 4 games that they've played. They're -6 in turnover margin. It's been bad. So looking back to last year, when they started 2-4, they were -3 in turnover margin heading into the bye week. Following the bye week, Baylor forced 12 turnovers in the final 6 regular season games, had a +8 turnover margin in their final 6, not including.
And there were some pretty good
game.
offenses too. Yeah, they're a pretty good offense they face.
Yeah, there absolutely were. But I think that is one of the areas that we've pointed to. It's that one, and then their kind of mid-level pressures turning into mid-level sacks, because so far this year they're last in the Big 12 in sacks, but they're right in the middle in pressures. And so something's not adding up there. Those 2 areas are the ones that you kind of feel like, could regress back to the mean a little bit and give you an opportunity to kind of maybe make some plays as a defense, because they haven't made enough of those plays this year. They haven't had enough 3-and-outs. They haven't forced enough turnovers. This is a matchup where I truly believe they probably can't win this game unless they force a turnover or 2, and they probably need to win the turnover margin, which they haven't done in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, and what's so crazy about this, and I've gone back and forth looking at these stats. So passes defended, which is making a play on the ball, covering a route well. There's a difference in passes defended, passes broken up. So you can have more passes defended, less passes broken up, where you're actually just in good coverage. The ball's relatively close, but it's still a good pass defense. So Baylor's number 6 in the Big 12 in conference play only at 5.33 per game. So they're number 6. The teams ahead of them have interceptions. Kansas State has 6, Arizona has 4, Texas Tech has 4, Oklahoma State has 2, which, interestingly enough, Oklahoma State's number, they're that high considering how bad their defense is. Kansas has 2 interceptions. Baylor has 1, and then, interestingly enough, Cincinnati's right below them and has 0. But then you look at the bottom of this list, and it's 4, 3, 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1. So like the teams that Baylor's outperforming in terms of passes defended or passes broken up, they're not turning those into interceptions. Those, like, we've seen the tips where Baylor's just not there to secure it. Like, they're a fingertip away. Those have to turn into turnovers. Like, those have to become those things. And it's very similar in regards to fumbles. So fumbles on the ground, Baylor's not recovering fumbles on the ground at all this season. The numbers are middle of the pack, Big 12, percentage-wise, they're just not getting those. So you hope that those things turn into interceptions, turnovers at some point. Because if not, in a game like this, you're going to struggle. And the turnover margin all season this year, offensively and defensively, the combination in turnover margin has kept games probably closer than they should have been from Baylor's perspective, and then caused them to lose games against specifically Arizona State.
Yes, it did. And those definitely have to be flipped. We've talked about a few of them, just, the ones, Phoenix Jackson not trying to pick up a fumble instead of diving on a fumble against Auburn was inexplicable. Jacob Redding's interception in the end zone against Arizona State, that he was down. It was an interception,
with
but
his
it's like
butt on
right
the
there.
pylon.
Yeah, I think DJ Coleman had one where the ball popped up in the air and he dove to try to intercept it and
In the
just
end
didn't quite
zone.
get there. Yeah, so
Yep.
it's just like a lot of those things are just right there, there for him. It just hasn't quite happened. Baylor's defense, Colt, it's been bad. And like you go through and look at basically any advanced analytics system, and they got Baylor outside the top 80 and dropping. Like after this week, this bye week, they dropped even more. They're 85th in F plus, which is, I know the one you like. They're 97th in Kelly Ford on defense. They're behind North Carolina in defensive analytics. And TCU, of course, hung 48 on North Carolina, and they had their backups in for most of the fourth quarter. So that there is something to that. Baylor has to get a lot better. I think we've talked about the areas where they can improve. When you kind of look at this defense as a whole, do you look at it as more they have to figure out ways to create turnovers and sacks, or do you look at this more as they need to do a better job of getting off the field in third down and red zone areas? Is there one side of the coin that you feel like is more important than the other at this point?
I mean, the way that they're playing, so they're not. It's not sustainable because you're playing a bend but don't break, but then you're not getting turnovers and you're not getting sacks.
Yeah.
So you, like if you look at yards per play, yards per carry, yards per pass attempt, they're where you want those numbers to be if that's the solid defense you're playing. The issue is you're middle of the pack or above. You're above average in the Big 12 play only in those categories. Even in passing efficiency defense, you're number 7. But then you start look. First downs is one that they're lower, but you expect that if you're saying, hey, we're going to give up this stuff in front of us, make you drive the length of the field, and then we're going to hold you to the field goal. But then you start looking at fumbles, you're 12th in the league with 0, so you're basically 16th because you don't have any. Interceptions, you're 13th. Red zone scoring touchdowns, you're below the middle of the pack, so you're at number 9 in that particular area. This is Big 12 plays only. You do a good job against explosive passing plays and explosive rushing plays in terms of where you feel like you have a bad defense, but then you look at those numbers and you're above middle of the pack. So you're not creating red zone field goal attempts at a great rate, and then you're not getting fumbles or interceptions. So those are the things that if you're going to continue in this style of play, you have to get those things or you're just going to give up points. So I think let's say Kansas State, are they that much better of an overall defense than Baylor's? Debatable. It's just that they're able to get interceptions, they're able to get sacks, and they're able to get off the field on third down in the red zone. So I think it's what does Baylor need to do to create those things if they're going to play this solid defense? If you feel like you're not going to create those things, then you probably just need to ditch this defense for the rest of the season. But I think Dave Aranda is probably saying, we've rode it out this long. Let's see if we can get some of these turnovers, because at a turnover margin where you're not forcing turnovers, your efficiency defense is going to fall because you're not getting off the field. You're still giving up field goal attempts, field goal makes. And they truly force 3 field goal attempts per game, which is, quote, the best in the Big 12 in that regard. But then you're also giving up touchdowns in the red zone. So I don't know, man. If you're choosing to play this, you better start getting turnovers. And that's the issue right now that's really hurting their efficiency defense, is because you're not getting those disruptive plays in sacks, tackles for loss, or turnovers.
See, and that's the craziest part when I look at this is like, I've watched every TCU game this year. I've watched every Baylor game, and the difference is literally sacks and turnovers. Those are the only difference between these two teams, because TCU can't get stops in the red zone either, and TCU can't get off field on third or fourth down. They're hemorrhaging yards, hemorrhaging all of those things, but they get turnovers, which sometimes causes a snowball effect because their offense is so good. So looking through the advanced analytics, I mentioned this, F plus has Baylor's defense 85th overall. Kelly Ford has Baylor's defense at 97th overall. I just think it's crazy when you have them there, and then you look at the defense for TCU. Kelly Ford's got them at 50, and F plus has them at 44. Defense,
and that's the difference.
Top 50 defense. That's the difference. That is literally
1,000%.
it. And that is it. But it's really, I think it's one of those things where when you look at it, you go, wow, that's a massive difference. And then you look at where they're ranked overall on these advanced metrics. F plus really likes TCU. They got them at 28 overall.
Yeah.
In the nation, they're a borderline top 25 team. And then you look at Baylor, 48th. Kelly Ford has TCU at 33rd in the nation overall and has Baylor at 46th. That's just such a big difference between potentially being a borderline top 25 team, top 30 team, to where Baylor is, which is hovering right around, a top 50 type team, which if you're a top 50 type team, that's the kind of team that you have to have luck in order to go 8-4. And if you don't have luck, you're going to be a 6-6 team. And so you look at that, just those slight improvements could push Baylor into the top 30. And if they get there, now you're talking about probably a lock to go 8-4, probably if you're playing at that level. And then you're giving yourself some room in, a home matchup against Utah. Maybe you're able to pull off an upset if you get some turnovers, a game against Cincinnati next weekend, this TCU game. Like, there are chances to flip games, but if they don't start getting there, that's where the wheels can really fall off. And that's where you might be looking at a team that is fighting for a bowl game. I truly believe that if they keep playing like this, they're going to be fighting to just make a bowl. Yeah. I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, no, it is. But I think it's also twofold, because you need your offense to stop turning over the football. And I think getting to the back half of the season, if your offense becomes better in situations down the field and not turning the football over, that's what they weren't doing. Yeah, we can talk about the turnovers from the defense in the second half of last season, but the offense just wasn't turning the football over either. Baylor has to get away. Like, that's the easiest thing to fix. Taking the ball away from opponents is difficult. Not turning the ball over is not nearly as difficult for an offense that should be really good. Baylor has to offensively clean that up, and I think they take it the next step. Defensively, if you're able to take an even turnover margin and give your team a plus turnover margin, then you start talking about, okay, all these games are more than winnable if both of those things sync up. I think it's baby steps. I think in this game, you want the offense to stop turning the ball over if your defense gets a couple, but I think it starts with the offense. And the reason I say that is because we know for the most part what the defense is trying to do. Okay, we're 6 games in. They're trying to get turnovers. They're trying to get red zone stops. I'm not worried about total yards. Like, throw that out the window. It doesn't matter. For the way this team's playing, it does not matter. And we've kind of known that, but I think now 6 games in, there's no denying
it. Doesn't matter if you're getting those stops.
Correct.
It matters if you're not getting those stops.
Right, exactly. So you have to look at the statistics that matter for the style of deep. Like, TCU wants to be disruptive. They want to go and get tackles for loss and sacks. The issue is they're doing those things, but the results are ultimately the same.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the Arizona State, Baylor and Arizona State. I mean, Baylor and TCU played different game plans against Arizona State for the most part. Played different game plans against Kansas State for the most part. The results, fairly comparable. Mm-hmm. And obviously TCU loses against it. So it's how you're getting to the end result and how you're executing what your game plan is. If you're not executing your game plan, then it doesn't matter. Like, you have to be able to get turnovers for the way Baylor's playing. And I'm not going to go and look at, statistics that don't necessarily matter for the way that Baylor's playing. They need to keep the ball in front of them, and they need to create turnovers and get sacks on third down to be disruptive. And they haven't done those things.
Absolutely. So the next area I wanted to focus on, I think we've talked a little bit about TCU's rushing offense and just kind of what we expect from them. They're the worst run offense in the entire Big 12 right now. I do think Kavorian Barnes is a much better back than they've had, and he's been in and out of their lineup. He had 80 yards this past weekend against Kansas State. I do think he helps them there, but still they're below average. Baylor, on the other hand, has probably the best running back in the Big 12, and they still have not ran the ball effectively. But the good news is they get to face TCU's run defense, which it's deceptive right now where they are currently ranked in the Big 12. I think they're 7th in the Big 12 in rushing yards per game. But if you look at the teams they've played, they have faced some really, really bad rushing offenses when you look through it. They've played Colorado and Kansas State, who are both in the bottom 4 in rushing yards per game in the Big 12, SMU, who would be 14th in the Big 12 in rushing, and North Carolina, who would be dead last in rushing yards. Also, below Abilene TCU. Christian doesn't run the ball either. Yeah, they'd be below TCU. So my point in all this is that if Baylor's rushing attack takes a step forward, if Bryson Washington is healthy off of the bye week, both those things are very key. Last year, Baylor turned everything around with their run game after the bye week. This year, they have a similar opportunity, and I do think TCU's run defense is pretty fraudulent. I don't think they've been tested. Bryson Washington is by far the best running back they faced this year. Keep in mind, they also did not face Kansas State with Dylan Edwards. He was out for that game. So their backup running back, who has not been very good all year long, ran for over 100 yards on them.
Yeah.
This is a game where Bryson has to play well. This is a game where I feel like Baylor needs to be able to feed him, because I do think the main difference between these two teams is that I actually have some belief in Baylor's rushing attack taking a big step forward the rest of the season. I don't have that belief with TCU.
Yeah, and that's you. We talked about this earlier. You mentioned it. Going back to last year, TCU didn't run the ball. They tried to at the end with Savion Williams, and that helped them a lot. I mean, they helped them kind of go on their winning streak at the end of the season, and they finished strong, which in that was a loss to Baylor. But they don't have that type of guy right now that can go back there and do what he did at the end of the season. So for Baylor, if you look at Bryson Washington's touches, carries, whatever, snaps in general, he was getting snaps. He wasn't getting the carries and touches that he was for the first 3 games. And we know that he was dinged up. But when he was touching the football, he was making things happen like that. It was never a production issue. It was always an injury. Now, the unfortunate part of that is you lost Dawson Pendergrass before the season ever started. I mean, that was a 1-2 punch that you didn't take it for granted in those moments, but you don't realize how that impacts your offense when Dawson just isn't able to come in there and get 6 yards of carry and break a long one for you because he's so physical. Baylor doesn't have that backup. So I don't know how long it potentially lasts for Bryson if he's healthy in this game. Like, does he get dinged up? But this is a game he should be as fresh as he's going to be the rest of the season, and Baylor should be able to go out and give him the football. And I'm going to pull up his numbers so I can look at it. But I mean, in the last 3 games in Big 12 play, I mean, what's he averaging? Like 6.5 yards per carry?
It's been really good. It's been really effective. He's just not getting the carries. The K-State game, he was dominant outside of the fumble. I mean, if he had played that full game healthy, I don't think that game ends up being what it was. I think Baylor probably wins by a touchdown or 10 points because they had no answer for him. Yeah,
so Arizona State, 17 carries, 111 yards, 6.5 yards to carry against a pretty good Arizona State rushing defense.
Until this week.
Until this good. Yeah. Oklahoma State, 10 for 77, so 7.7 yards per carry. And then against Kansas State, 9 carries, 65 yards, 7.2 yards per carry. That's Big 12 play only. And then you even go back to the Auburn game, and I know that he didn't get a ton of carries in that game in general, but Auburn, a pretty good rushing defense.
Really good.
He had 14 carries, 54 yards for 3.9 yards per carry.
And then he had a 50-yard one called back.
So, like, that's where you look at TCU's offensive rush game back to UNC, and I remember watching the game. We were texting about it in that game, like, TCU looks like they're going to run the football. Well, since then, it's been obsolete. Like, it hasn't been there. Barnes has been dinged up. They're just not committed to it. Baylor, on the other hand, it's like the explanation is there. I know Barnes has been beat up, but I don't trust TCU to go out and run the football the way that Baylor will be if Bryson Washington's healthy, and say if Michael Turner and Caden Knighton can take on 10 combined carries throughout this game.
See, and I those two, it's kind of like whatever you get from them is just kind of a bonus. You need them to just plot, just, not be a negative, right, in the run game. Because
absolutely.
You really need to be able to give I firmly believe this. Baylor needs to be able to give Bryson 25 carries in this game.
And he has had that once this year, and that was against SMU.
Right. And I think touches wise, he got up to 25, maybe 1 or 2 other times, right? If you include reception. So I guess 25 total touches is kind of where I think he needs to get to. Question is he healthy enough for that? Because he wasn't healthy enough for that against Kansas State. It was very clear, like, he was having to get picked up off the turf every single time because he couldn't get himself up. And so that's a big factor in this game, because I do think he's probably the biggest difference maker as far as what does Baylor have that TCU does not have. That's where the difference is in my eyes. I think he's 4th in the Big 12 in rushing yards per game, but rushing yards total. But the bigger area that I'm looking at here, and we mentioned it last week because I thought the Kansas State game was the opportunity for Baylor to really lean into this. Obviously, Bryson was much more banged up than I think we initially thought. I mean, wearing that big old flak jacket. I mean, it was, he was not what we thought he was going to be, but the efficiency was there. Again, in the last 11 games in the last 2 seasons, Baylor's 10-1 when they've ran for 150 yards in a game. And the only loss was the Hail Mary against Colorado, in
Yep.
which they had a Hail Mary just to be in that game, or else Baylor would have won that game as well, and they'd be 11-0.
Yeah, and Baylor wasn't, at that point of the season, Baylor wasn't running the football well at all.
No, Sawyer had like a 50-yard run in that game
Yeah.
that really, but again, that's what they need. I mean, that's all you need. You know, occasionally is those 50-yard runs that can kind of propel your rushing offense.
Yeah.
But I just think in general, Baylor has to get to that 150 number. That has to be a goal for them this week. I bet it was during the bye week. I bet it was something that they really emphasized because they got to figure out a way to get there. I mean, Aranda's 28-7 in his entire career during his time at Baylor. I mean, that 28-7 when they've ran for 150 yards, but 10-1 over the last 2 seasons. I think that is just one of those benchmark numbers that you have to look at, and there's stock in it. There's a trend there. And if Baylor can reach that on the road against TCU, I feel pretty good that they can win this game because I don't think TCU is going to touch that number.
Yeah, and you talked about the 150 mark. So TCU gave up 177 to ACU, Abilene Christian, which is interesting. I mean, I knew that I watched that game and kind of saw the numbers of that game. They couldn't stop ACU in that particular game. Arizona State, so Big 12 games only. Arizona State went for 201, Colorado went for 126, and Kansas State went for 145. And if Bryson's healthy, I think that Baylor's rushing offense is Arizona State's is a good rushing offense. It's different, but I would definitely put Baylor's rushing game above Colorado and Kansas State at this point of the season. Obviously, you don't have Avery Johnson at quarterback to do it, but then you look at, we talked about Bryson's Big 12 games this year. You go back to last year against Texas Tech, when this all really got started. These are his yards per carry in Big 12 games. 11.2 against Texas Tech. 4.6 was the game with Dawson Prendergrass went nuts on like 5 carries for 200 yards or something stupid. So 4.6, and then it was 7.5, 6.8. Against Houston, it was 3.9, which was his worst outing of that season, but he still went for over 100 yards. He had a fumble in that game as well. And then bounced back against Kansas, 6.9 yards per carry, 192 yards. That goes to this year, and he's 6.5, 7. They have to get him touches, and you just hope that he's healthy. I don't know exactly if it's something with his ribs, if it's something with it has to be a rib considering he was wearing that jacket.
It is, yeah.
And so you're how healthy can that really get in 1 week? But we know that he battled through it. So you just hope that those 2 weeks of no contact treatment, that he's ready to go and take 25 carries. Because if he's at 25 carries, this seems really hard to beat. And that means because if he's getting 25 carries, he's not really getting stopped.
Right. And you mentioned Avery Johnson this past week helping Kansas State. He helped a little, but Joe Jackson, 110 yards on the ground, 27 carries. He kind of iced the game at the end. I do think if that game was a little bit more competitive towards the end, those numbers might have gone up a little bit more. K-State was just kind of taking the air out of the ball for a little bit there. But 110 yards for Joe Jackson, I would bet that that's probably a career high for him. Because from what I've seen, I have not seen much that gave me belief that he's that good of a running back or that talented of a running back at this point in his career. So once again, that makes you look at Baylor and go, hey man, you've been a better rushing team than Kansas State all year. And they had to use their backup running back in that game. And he ran for over 100 yards. Bryson has got to find a way to move the chains. They got to find a way to give him the football as much as possible. And obviously the injury is going to play a factor in that. If he's too injured for that, that's going to be a problem for Baylor. I mean, it just is. That's going to be an issue because their backup running backs, while I like the future for Cade Knighton and Michael Turner, there's still some growth that needs to happen for both of them.
Oh, you see the potential.
Yeah, you see it. Hopefully off of the bye week, there's another step forward for both of them that they can rely on them a little bit more. But in general, this feels like a Bryson Washington game. And as you saw at the end of last year's game, he really took that game over against TCU.
Yeah, he did.
Just punishing run after punishing run. And he was the difference. You know, TCU was having to use gimmicks and having to put Savion Williams in the backfield to run the football. And Baylor was just lining up and run the football right at him for a lot of that game. And that kind of allowed them to be just a notch more consistent on offense than TCU was.
Yeah. So you go through Bryson's carries this season. Then I want to talk about the offense in general in this game. But he had 31 against SMU, where SMU just loaded the box the majority of that game and wasn't going to let the run beat them. And then Sawyer threw for 1,000,000 yards and won that game. But he had 31 carries. Sanford had 21. Arizona State 17, Oklahoma State 10, Kansas State 9. So the trail is right there. It's like, oh, he was hurt. Like clearly.
Yeah.
So where that actually happened, I mean, there was a speculation that it could have even happened in the Auburn game. That's why he only had 14 carries. I'm sure that was part of
State.
it. Yeah. I mean, there's been multiple things, but what is 17 against Arizona State? He had the long run in that game to give him 111 yards. But yeah, I mean, obviously he hasn't been healthy. And so getting back for this TCU game is huge. I mean, you don't want to say just give us one really good game, but if they're going to have a good game, this is one that you need to get the team back on track with.
Yeah, it really is, because next week against Cincinnati, it's going to be much more about the pass against the Bearcats. So yeah, and so is the UCF game is going to be the opposite, going to be more about the run. So there's a lot kind of to that, and we'll see kind of how that plays out. But Colt, what do you have on the offense for this week? Is there any notes that you have about the passing game or the offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, nothing specific. I'm just really curious. The comment from Dave Aranda at the end of the Kansas State game about Michael Trigg and involving him more, scheming him up more to get him more touches. What's the ultimate goal with him? Is it to get him 8 receptions a game? Like, is it because at this point, I don't know how everyone at receiver is covered, and then you're able to cover Michael Trigg. And then that obviously leaks down to the run game. But like, we can talk about receivers and we can talk about the complement of what other Big 12 teams have, but Michael Trigg does so much damage just in alignment. And I know that Baylor has known that, but now are they kind of really saying, okay, let's really use this to our advantage, because teams, they're going to have to account for him in so many ways. And so I look at TCU, who already leaves the middle of the field open so much. Are you using him in the middle of the field, or are you aligning him away from the middle of the field, pulling more safeties, linebackers away from the middle of the field, and then just running the football? I'm immensely curious how this game goes from that standpoint, because we know we want Bryson to get 25 carries. But is this a game where you're maybe saying, well, you don't utilize the middle of the field defensively, you vacate it so much and it's there for the taking so much? Is Michael Trigg over the middle just there all day long? Like, what is the game plan here? And if Baylor isn't turning the football over, is this the game that we see the offense finally perform at its peak? Because truly, have we seen it for a full game? And that's, for a defense, for an opponent, that's kind of scary, because it just hasn't been. And maybe a lot of it goes back to Bryson's health in the running back room. But I don't know. I just feel like this game could be let's kind of pull it all out and see what we got.
Yeah, I think TCU's kind of in that same boat. Maybe the North Carolina game is the one game you can point to where they put it all together as an offense. I think they're still kind of waiting on that as well. But yeah, on the Baylor side of things, I agree. What's the next step? I think a lot of the next step is really, again, it's something that Dave Aranda has mentioned so many times throughout his tenure at Baylor. It's just playing complementary football, and they have not done that. This offense has been really good, but they have 14 points off of 9 3-and-outs or turnovers forced by the defense. 14 points. That's just,
it's crazy.
That's not good enough. That's not good enough at all for an offense that's this good, that's this talented. It's a surefire top 25 offense. And so
easy. It can be better. Yeah,
it can be. That next step is, how do you get into the top 15? How do you get into the top 10? Like, how do you take that step forward? And there are some defenses on this schedule that I do feel like you can take advantage of. And this is one of them. Like this one next week against Cincinnati, even UCF to an extent, just because you don't know how the game flow will go there. But yeah, these are the opportunities. These 2 games, really, I do think the offense is going to specifically have to carry them and have to figure out a way to win this game. And then you just need your defense to just make some plays, just help them out in some ways. But this is one of those games where it's like, Sawyer Robertson, you want to be in the Heisman conversation? Here's a game. Here's a game where if you come out and play really, really well, you might see yourself in that conversation pretty quickly, or at least more conversation going into that Cincinnati game. You talk about Michael Trigg. This guy's about to break all the Baylor tight end records, and we're only through 6 games.
He could. We might wake up on the last game of the season, bowl game time, and he's at 1,000 receiving yards.
Yeah, that the one that's going to be tough because he only has 4 touchdowns. I want to say, doesn't Ben Sims have a year with 9? I think that might be the record for Baylor touchdown wise.
Yeah. I'm not sure about that one.
But yards, he's going to smash. I mean, I think Dabney had 500 and something.
Yeah,
like, he's going to break that in 2 weeks.
Speaking of, like, thank you, Drake Dabney, for leaving Baylor when you did, because deciding to go to TCU of all teams, and Baylor, because of that, got Michael Trigg, and you take that trade off. And Baylor was willing to pay to keep Drake.
Mm-hmm.
Baylor would have gotten him for 1 year, and you wouldn't have had Michael Trigg. Like, just gonna throw that out there. Appreciate that, Drake, for making that decision to go to TCU.
Yeah, because Trigg has been so good. Trigg, I mean, he might win the best tight end award in the country.
What's that, the Mackey Award?
Mackey.
What is Mackey?
Yeah, it's the Mackey. Yeah, he's got a great shot at it now. He's been awesome. I do think he's going to be a big factor in this game. I do think it will come across the middle of the field. We saw that in last year's game against TCU.
Mm-hmm.
He's just so dynamic. And even when he goes above the linebackers, kind of on those... It's a vertical route, sort of. It's also just kind of sitting behind the linebackers. He's very tough to guard in that area.
It's like bracket, essentially. But Sawyer just puts that ball high, and he knows, hey, if as high as I can get it, he's probably going to be able to go up and make a play on it. And, yeah, it's impressive, man. And, like, I think that's where it goes back to that original point is, where does Baylor pull the safeties? Where does Baylor pull the linebackers with his alignments? Like, do you just let him go out there and win one-on-ones all day? Or do you just say, hey, we want this game to be a 30-carry game for Bryson with no resistance to the middle of the field? And then you just line him up on the outside and there's nobody on the middle of the field. Because, like, that's the point. I don't think TCU can do anything different. I don't think anybody on the schedule, if you're lining Michael Trigg up on the outside with 3 other receivers on the field, what are you going to do? Like, I don't know the answer to that. Like, I don't know how you cover it.
Yeah, it's definitely
defense.
A conundrum. Yeah, and I mean, Baylor's got 5 guys with over 265 receiving yards. I mean, it's been pretty crazy. Obviously, Cameron and Trigg are the headliners, as both of them have over 430 receiving yards on the year. I think a big X factor for Baylor going forward is how much do they get from Ashton Hawkins? They need him to play, I think, to the level that he was playing at early in the year. Like, you go look at that SMU game where he and Josh Cameron are just dominating. It's like, I don't think he's been at that level since then.
This could be a game for that in the middle of the field. This could definitely be a game for him.
It very well could be. And I also don't really think that TCU's cornerbacks are to the level that they have been. I think their safeties are really good.
Yeah.
But their safeties also have a tendency to give up big plays because they're trying to get interceptions every time. Bud Clark and Jamel Johnson, very good at creating turnovers.
Yeah, I love them. I love both of them. Yes. I like them a bunch, yeah.
But they will also get beat. And it's because they are very aggressive when it comes to trying to force turnovers. But their cornerbacks a little bit more susceptible. And I also think, like, yeah, as good as Bud Clark and Jamel Johnson are, that's still a good matchup for Trigg. Neither one of them is very big. Neither one of them is going to be in a great situation to cover him. They don't have a great linebacker to cover him either, which is, again, that's why it's like, how are you going to guard this dude?
Yeah. If you're putting a linebacker on Trigg, you're putting a safety with him as well. Like, there's no either or. You might be able. I don't know who their main slot corner is, but, like, you might be able to pull a corner, but even then, it's like
the size,
the size, and it's in the potential for yards after the catch for Trigg is much different than, good example, Drake Dabney. Like, Drake could get it, but it's just a different animal, and I just don't know. I don't know. I guess we've been kind of saying this all season, right? I think we've known this ability of the offense, but I think the X factor is a healthy running game. And that's where this gets tricky for TCU if Bryson's healthy in this game and he's able to get 25 carries. Because I think if that's there, Baylor's going to take it. But then if you try to take that away, and you go back to last year, Baylor didn't have to throw the football. Sawyer had an average day because Bryson Washington ran for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns. Like, I don't know what TCU's game plan will be in this game.
Yeah, and you mentioned who's going to play in the box. They kind of moved these guys around. Jamel Johnson's played some there, but it's mainly been Austin Jordan and Bud Clark. Those are the 2 that you're probably going to see covering the slot more times than not, which means probably covering Trigg. some in this game. So that's the matchup you'll probably be looking at there, as well as, if Cole Wilson lines up in the slot, one of those guys will be covering him as well, most likely, depending on what they decide to do with their linebackers in this matchup. All right, Colt, before we go, what is your prediction for Baylor versus TCU on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, this is really tough. And as I mentioned off the top, you have a rivalry that when Baylor's not bad, I mean, you're expecting a three-point game, overtime game. And this is one of those games where I think you have two very similar teams. Maybe it could go wonky and a team wins by 14 plus points. You hope that's in Baylor's favor, right? Like they haven't had one of those and maybe they're due for one of those. It's been 20, 30 years now, I guess. It's just nuts.
1994.
So 30 years. Lines at currently 2.5. We've seen it jump up 3.5, 2.5, over under 65.5. And man, it's hard. I know Baylor's played well on the road. I think if you look at this from a non-analytic standpoint, you just look at these teams. I think you can point to TCU's lack of running game and then Baylor struggles on defense to say this is why the opponent's going to win. I just think that the ability to not run the football for TCU is too helpful to Baylor's defense versus TCU's inability to Baylor's overall defensive inability. Like I think it's when you become one-dimensional and you give Dave Aranda that ability to just say, okay, hey, we're going to take the pass away from you now, and if you want to beat us with the run, that's fine. That's when he's at his best. Because of that, I think Baylor – I can't even believe I say this. I think Baylor wins this game, a really close game. Probably, I mean, heck, it might be 37-34, 40-37, very similar to last year. I think Baylor's overall ability to play well on the road, TCU's reeling a little bit because, believe it or not, Baylor is 4-2 and have won 2 in a row. TCU's lost 2 of 3. Like, where are the mindsets of these teams? TCU's banged up. And so for all of those reasons, I'll say Baylor wins on the road. It's just hard for me to not pick Baylor in a game that's a 2.5-point line. Like, I don't, it's a rivalry game. I could very well easily see Baylor losing this, but I'll give Baylor the win 40-37.
So currently, like you said, TCU is a 2.5-point favorite. The over-under 65.5. So Vegas is definitely thinking a shootout. It jumped all the way up to 67.5 at one point. So it's been moving around quite a bit. I think where when I look at this game, I am kind of betting that on one thing kind of getting better for both these teams. And what is that one thing that I think is going to take the biggest jump heading into this matchup? And for me, I think it's Baylor's run game. I think that is the area. If Bryson Washington's healthy, which is a big if, I think their run game makes their offense more difficult to deal with than TCU's offense. And if Baylor can run the football to the level that I'm expecting off of the bye week, then they're going to give TCU a whole lot of problems, because if they can run the football and then you got all these options in the passing game and you got a defense that is back on their heels, a defense that's had to play 5 straight games, a defense that probably is going to start to get worn down at some point, I just think that favors Baylor a lot when you got a powerful running back like Bryson Washington, a guy that can really take over a game. I think that gives them some edges. I'll also say, Baylor's been better on the road over the last 2 years than they have been at home. And they get this 11 a.m., game slot. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, that's helpful. Baylor's been a lot better at 11 a.m. than they have been.
I'll just say this and I'll let you finish. As much as Baylor fans don't like 11 a.m. kicks, TCU fans don't want an 11 a.m. kick. Not off of the 2 and 3 stretch.
Right, exactly. And so I think all of that just kind of adds up to me looking at this matchup and saying, I think TCU is going to start to wear down a little bit. I think that's going to impact their offensive line. I think that's going to impact their defense. And Baylor coming off of the bye week, it's very favorable. Dave Aranda's 4-1 off of true bye weeks, 5-2 when he's had a week or two off, going back to the COVID year, because obviously there was a week or two in there where you had like 2 or 3 weeks off, but 5-2 overall when he's been given extra time off, not including bowl games. I think that favors Baylor here. And I really, when I was looking at this game in the offseason, this was a game that I had Baylor losing. But
we know.
Yeah, I know. I had Baylor losing this game, but I've kind of changed my tune based on what I've seen from these two teams. Unfortunately, I don't think Baylor's defense is going to have a great game. I think they're going to give up some points here. But I also think Baylor's offense can manage that and score. I think the defense will somehow win a turnover battle for the first time since the Samford game and only the second time all year. I think that happens in this game barely. I think it'll be something like 2-1 in the turnover category.
Or
but
it could be 1-0.
Done. Yeah, it could be 1-0, but I think Baylor gets the win. I agree with you. I think it's going to be played in the 30s. I think it's going to be something like 38-34, 37-33, something along those lines. But I think Baylor's going to win this game in what should be a very close game in what I know has been a rivalry dominated by TCU. But at some point, these trends are meant to be broken. And I think that Baylor's just a little bit of a better team. And I think there's a little bit more upside with this team coming off of a bye week than what TCU has in the midst of this long stretch of games.
Yeah, and going through, and I predicted it 40-37. That might change by the time this is out, just from my opinions. But TCU scored in their last 4 games 35, 27, 35, and 28. And so I'm predicting TCU to score 37, which is more than they've scored in the last 4 games. Baylor to score 40, which is more than they've Kansas State scored 41. I just think this is the best offense that they have faced. And those numbers just say, hey, like Baylor has a chance to go out and score. And I think where the number stays lower than some people might anticipate is because of the reason I think you mentioned. If Baylor's run game gets going, this can be a shorter game. The clock's not stopping on first downs right now. And if Baylor's able to run the football with Bryson Washington, this might be a much lower total than we anticipate. It might be 10 points lower combined than we anticipate. So I think because of my belief that Baylor's run game will get going, I think that's why Baylor holds TCU under 40 points. And everybody's going to say, well, TCU is going to score 45 points with ease. Well, not if this game's going slow. And if Baylor's able to get some turnovers. But yeah, my X factors: don't turn the ball over on offense. Maybe you get one on defense, but I think if you can just be even 0-0, you're in a pretty good spot in this game.
We will see how it all plays out on Saturday at 11 a.m. The game is at TCU, and Baylor tries to continue their path towards a Big 12 championship because, believe it or not, they still only have one Big 12 loss. If they win this game, they're squarely in the conference title hunt. We'll see if they can get it done. Thanks, as always, for joining, Colt. We will be back later this week to talk about our best bets in the Big 12, but thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been the Bearcast on SicEm365.com.